At my grandson's university graduation, his fiancée introduced me to her parents as a senile old farmer who still smells like cow manure. She laughed when she said it, loud enough for the entire reception hall to hear. Her father, a property developer from Toronto, chuckled and shook his head. "Don't worry," he said, patting my shoulder like I was a stray dog. "We'll make sure Tyler doesn't end up like you." What they didn't know was that her father's entire development company operated on land I'd been leasing to his corporation for the past 30 years. When his business partner walked over and saw me standing there in my worn flannel shirt, his face went white. "Mr. Carruthers," he whispered, "is that you?" The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "My name is Walter Carruthers. I'm 72 years old. If you're watching this video, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments if anyone has ever underestimated you because of how you looked. I want to hear your story." The June air inside the University of British Columbia's Chan Center was crisp from the air conditioning, but sweat was already beading on my grandson Tyler's forehead. He stood near the champagne table in his graduation gown, looking every bit the young man I'd helped raise since his parents died in that logging accident 15 years ago. His fiancée, Madison Chen Park, was wrapped around his arm like an expensive accessory, her designer dress probably costing more than my truck. I watched from near the entrance, wearing my best clothes, which to everyone else looked like my worst. A faded denim jacket over a plaid shirt, work boots I'd polished that morning, and jeans with permanent grass stains that no amount of washing could remove. I looked exactly like what I was pretending to be. A simple cattle rancher from the Caribou region who didn't belong among these doctors, lawyers, and tech entrepreneurs celebrating their children's achievements. Madison spotted me, and her smile tightened. She'd been trying to keep me away from her parents all afternoon, positioning Tyler between us like a human shield. But now they were walking over, and there was nowhere for her to hide her embarrassment. "Tyler, darling," Madison said, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness I'd learned to recognize, "why don't you introduce your grandfather to my parents?" Tyler looked at me with apologetic eyes. He knew what was coming. He'd warned me that Madison's family was particular about appearances, which was his gentle way of saying they were snobs who measured human worth in dollar signs. Her father, Richard Chen Park, extended his hand with the enthusiasm of someone touching a dead fish. "So you're the rancher. Madison's told us all about you." His emphasis on rancher made it sound like a disease. "That's right," I said, keeping my voice mild. "Been working the land up near Williams Lake for over 50 years now." Richard's wife, Lillian, gave me a once-over that made me feel like livestock at an auction. "How rustic. You must find Vancouver overwhelming." "I manage," I said. That's when Madison decided to perform for her audience. She turned to a group of nearby parents, her voice projecting like she was on stage. "Everyone, this is Tyler's grandfather. He's a senile old farmer who still smells like cow manure." She wrinkled her nose theatrically. "We're hoping the fresh Vancouver air will do him some good." The laughter that followed was polite but cruel. I saw Tyler flinch, saw him open his mouth to defend me, but Madison squeezed his arm hard enough to silence him. She'd been doing that a lot lately, I'd noticed. Silencing him. Richard joined in the mockery. "Don't worry," he said, patting my shoulder. "We'll make sure Tyler doesn't end up like you. Madison's going to help him reach his full potential. Can't have a lawyer married to someone with farming genes dragging him down?" I stood there, absorbing their contempt like rain on stone. I'd weathered worse. I'd buried my wife, buried my son and daughter-in-law, survived droughts and market crashes, and a recession that nearly broke me. These people and their words were nothing but wind, but then I saw him. Walking across the reception hall with a champagne flute in his hand was David Harrington, the business partner in Chen Park Developments. I'd known David for 3 decades, ever since he'd come to me as a young real estate agent asking if I'd consider leasing some of my unused land for a development project. He didn't know then what he was really asking for. He didn't know the full extent of what I owned. David's eyes found mine across the room. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. His champagne flute trembled, sending tiny waves through the golden liquid. He walked over slowly, like a man approaching a grizzly bear. "Richard," David said, his voice barely above a whisper, "do you know who this is?" Richard rolled his eyes. Some farmer from Tyler's family. Apparently he raised the boy after some tragedy or another. David set his champagne down on a nearby table. His hand was shaking. This isn't some farmer, Richard. This is Walter Carruthers. So? Walter Carruthers, David repeated, enunciating each syllable. The Walter Carruthers. The man who owns every acre of land your company has developed for the past 30 years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard laughed nervously. That's impossible. We lease that land from Carruthers Holdings. It's a numbered company. The owner is some anonymous. You're looking at him, David interrupted. This man owns Carruthers Holdings. He owns the land under your flagship development in Cole Harbor. He owns the lot where you're building that 40-story condo tower. He owns the farmland you've been trying to rezone for the past 5 years. David turned to me with something close to reverence in his eyes. Mr. Carruthers, I had no idea you were connected to this family. If I'd known, you didn't need to know, I said quietly. I preferred it that way. Madison's laugh cut through the tension. Oh, please. This is ridiculous. He's obviously confused. He drives a truck older than I am. He lives in a cabin with no internet. There's no way. Madison. David's voice was ice. Stop talking. Excuse me? I said stop talking. David looked at Richard, then at me, then back at Richard. The lease renewal on the Cole Harbor property was supposed to be signed next month. The terms were extremely generous, 30% below market rate, because that's what Mr. Carruthers has always offered us. He's never raised the rates in 30 years, even when he could have quadrupled them. Richard was sweating now. David, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said, speaking for the first time since the revelation, is that you thought you could disrespect a man based on how he dresses. I looked at Madison. And you. You thought you could insult me in front of my grandson and face no consequences. Madison's face had gone the color of curdled milk. I didn't know. That's the problem with people like you, I said. You only treat people with respect when you know they can hurt you. When you think someone is beneath you, you show your true face. I turned to David. Cancel the lease renewals. All of them. David's eyes widened. Mr. Carruthers, that would... I know what it would do. Richard grabbed my arm. Wait. Let's talk about this. Whatever she said, she didn't mean it. She's young. She's nervous. She was just trying to impress. I looked down at his hand on my arm until he removed it. You laughed, I said. You patted my shoulder like I was garbage and you laughed. You said you'd make sure my grandson didn't end up like me, as if I was a disease to be cured. I stepped closer to him, and despite being 72 years old, I still had 3 inches and 30 years of farm work on him. Your entire company operates on my land, Mr. Chen Park. Every building, every development, every dollar you've made in the past 3 decades exists because I allowed it. And you stood here and called me senile. Tyler stepped forward. Grandpa, please. I held up my hand. Not now, Tyler. No. Tyler's voice was stronger than I expected. No, I need to say something. He turned to Madison, and something in his face had changed. Something I recognized. It was the same look his father had gotten when he'd finally stood up to the bullies who'd tormented him in high school. Madison, I've let you control too much for too long. I've let you talk down to my grandfather. Make excuses for your family's behavior. Convince me that I needed to be polished to be worthy of you. He pulled at his tie, loosening it. But I'm done. I won't stand here and watch you humiliate the man who raised me. Madison grabbed his arm. Tyler, be reasonable. Think about your career. My father has connections. Your father has leases, Tyler said, pulling away from her. Leases that belong to my grandfather. Connections built on someone else's land. He looked at me with eyes that made my heart swell. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I should have stopped her months ago. I nodded slowly. We'll talk about that later. Richard was pulling at his collar, his face a dangerous shade of red. This is absurd. You can't cancel 30 years of business relationships because of some hurt feelings. I'll sue. You'll do what? David interrupted, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Sue, the man who owns the ground your buildings sit on, our lease agreements give him the right to non-renewal with 90 days' notice. He's not breaking any contracts. He's just not continuing them. The land under the Coal Harbor development alone is worth over $400 million, I said. I've been leasing it to you for below market rate because I believed in supporting Canadian businesses. I believed in community. But community goes both ways, Mr. Chen Park. Respect goes both ways. Madison was crying now, ugly tears that smeared her expensive makeup. Tyler, tell him to stop. Tell him we didn't mean it. It was just a joke. Tyler didn't even look at her. He was looking at me with a mixture of pride and shame. Pride that I was standing up for myself. Shame that he hadn't done it sooner. The graduation reception had gone completely silent. Every parent, every graduate, every server was watching the scene unfold. Cell phones were recording. The humiliation that Madison had tried to heap on me was now reflecting back on her family like sunlight off a mirror. I adjusted my denim jacket. I've said what I came to say. Tyler, when you're ready to leave, I'll be in the truck. I walked out of the Chan Center, feeling the weight of 300 stairs on my back. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. My old Ford F-250 was parked at the far end of the lot, dusty and dented, looking exactly as out of place as I had inside. I climbed into the cab and waited. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 days passed before the Chen Park family made their first move. I was sitting on my porch in Williams Lake, watching the sun set over my cattle pastures when the dust cloud appeared on my private road. It wasn't Tyler's car. Tyler was staying at a hotel in Vancouver, working up the courage to officially break off his engagement. He'd called me twice, sounding more like himself than he had in 2 years. This was a rental SUV, sleek and black, completely wrong for the gravel roads. I knew who it was before the doors even opened. Madison's father emerged first, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my tractor. Madison followed, her face set in a mask of forced humility. Her mother stayed in the car, apparently unwilling to breathe country air. Richard marched up to my porch like a man facing a firing squad. Mr. Carruthers, we need to talk. I figured you'd come eventually, I said, though I expected lawyers, not a family visit. Lawyers are expensive, Richard said. And right now, thanks to you, I'm facing some cash flow issues. I gestured to the empty rocking chair beside me. Sit. He sat. Madison stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, looking at my property like it was a garbage dump. I want to apologize, Richard said, the words obviously causing him physical pain. What happened at the graduation was unfortunate. Madison and I said things we shouldn't have. We didn't know who you were. And if you had known, he hesitated, we would have been more diplomatic. So you would have hidden your contempt instead of showing it. That's not an apology. That's public relations. Richard shifted in the chair. Mr. Carruthers, Walter, I'm a practical man. We can stand on principle, or we can make a deal. I'm prepared to offer you a personal settlement, outside of the business arrangements. $500,000. Call it a reconciliation gift. In exchange, you continue the leases as previously agreed. I rocked slowly in my chair, watching the last light fade over the mountains. My property extended as far as the eye could see, over 12,000 acres of some of the most valuable land in British Columbia. I'd purchased it decades ago when it was considered worthless wilderness. Now developers from around the world were begging for a piece of it. $500,000, I said. That's what you think my dignity is worth? It's a generous offer. It's an insult, wrapped in a bribe. I looked at him. You still don't understand, do you? I don't need your money. I have more money than your entire development company will ever see. I live like this because I choose to, not because I have to. Richard's face hardened. Then, what do you want? I want you to leave my property. I want your daughter to leave my grandson alone. And I want you to understand that actions have consequences. Madison climbed the porch steps, her heels clicking on the worn wood. You can't do this to us. You're ruining my family because I made one little comment about cow manure. It wasn't one little comment. It was a window into who you really are. You're old, Madison said, her her voice dripping with venom. "You're old, and you live alone, and you're going to die alone, and then all of this land will go to Tyler anyway. Once we're married, there won't be a marriage." Madison laughed. "Tyler loves me. He's confused right now because you manipulated him, but he'll come back. He always comes back. I've trained him well." The word trained hung in the air like a bad smell. Richard stood up. "Madison, that's enough." "No, it's not enough." She was trembling with rage, months of frustration boiling over. "Do you know what I gave up to be with Tyler? I could have married anyone. I had men with family money, real money, old money. But I chose Tyler because he had potential. And now this old goat is trying to ruin everything." I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the movement. "You chose Tyler because you thought he was vulnerable. You thought you could control him because he'd lost his parents. You saw a young man with no close family except an old grandfather who wouldn't live forever, and you saw an opportunity. That's not. You didn't know about my land. You didn't know about my wealth. You just saw a target. Someone you could mold into the perfect accessory for your life." I walked to the edge of my porch, looking out at the land that had been in my family for 3 generations. "But Tyler isn't an accessory. He's my grandson. He's the only family I have left. And I would burn every acre of this property before I let someone like you get their claws into him." Madison's mask finally cracked. The sophisticated socialite vanished, replaced by something uglier. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "My father has lawyers. He has connections in the provincial government. We'll have you investigated. We'll find something wrong with your taxes, your land claims. Something. Nobody's hands are that clean." Richard grabbed her arm. "Madison, stop." "No! He's destroying our family over nothing. We're going to lose everything because I made fun of his stupid clothes." "You're destroying yourselves," I said quietly. "I'm just no longer protecting you from the consequences." I watched them leave, the black SUV kicking up dust as it disappeared down my road. I knew this wasn't over. People like the Chen Parks didn't accept defeat gracefully. They would come back harder, meaner, more desperate. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Margaret, it's Walter. I think we need to have that conversation about estate protection we discussed last year. Things are about to get complicated." The attacks began 2 weeks later. First came the anonymous tips to the Canada Revenue Agency, claiming I had hidden income and unreported foreign accounts. The auditors arrived at my door with boxes of paperwork and suspicious eyes. They left 3 weeks later, finding nothing but meticulous records going back 40 years. I'd been paying my taxes honestly since before Madison Chen Park was born. Then came the inspection from the Ministry of Agriculture, claiming they'd received reports of animal welfare violations. The inspector was a young woman named Sarah who spent 2 days examining every inch of my operation. She left with a glowing report about how well my cattle were treated and a personal invitation to bring her daughter to see the calves in spring. When those failed, the Chen Parks got creative. An article appeared in a Vancouver lifestyle magazine, painting me as a reclusive eccentric who was destroying a respected business family out of spite. It quoted anonymous sources who described me as mentally unstable, possibly suffering from dementia. The article suggested that my grandson was being manipulated by an elderly man desperate for control. Tyler called me the day it was published. "Grandpa, have you seen the magazine?" "I've seen it. They're saying you're crazy. They're saying I'm under your influence, like I'm some kind of victim." I could hear the anger in his voice, and beneath it, the fear. Tyler had always hated conflict. It was one of the things that had made him vulnerable to Madison in the first place. "What do you want to do about it?" I asked. There was a long pause. "I want to fight back." I smiled. "Then let's fight back." The lawsuit landed on Richard Chen Park's desk a week later. It was a masterpiece of legal precision, outlining a case for defamation, intentional interference with business relationships, and harassment. But more importantly, it included documentation that Richard had never expected to see. For the past 5 years, Madison had been using Tyler's power of attorney to access his financial accounts. She'd convinced him to sign the documents early in their relationship, claiming it was just in case something happened and they needed to manage shared expenses. In reality, She'd been funneling money from Tyler's trust fund, the one I'd established for him after his parents died, into her own investment accounts. The total came to just over $300,000. Richard showed up at my door alone this time. No Madison, no lawyers, just a man whose entire world was crumbling. "She didn't tell me," he said, standing in my driveway. "I swear to God, I didn't know about the money. I thought Tyler was paying for everything willingly. Would it have mattered if you'd known?" He was silent for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably not." He looked at me with something approaching honesty. "I've spent my whole life chasing money, Mr. Carruthers. It's the only thing I know how to measure. Success, worth, value, it's all tied to numbers in my head. When I saw you at that graduation, I saw someone with no numbers, someone who didn't count. And now? Now I see someone who's been counting for a lot longer than I have." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is a formal apology. From me, from my wife, from Madison. It's also a statement admitting that the magazine article was planted by our family. We'll issue a public retraction. We'll drop any plans to challenge your lease decisions." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "What about the money Madison stole?" "We'll repay every cent, plus interest. Whatever you think is fair." "It's not about what I think is fair. It's about what Tyler thinks." Richard nodded slowly. "He won't talk to us. He won't even let Madison near him. She went to his apartment last week, and he had the police escort her out." "Good," I thought. "Good for you, Tyler." "I can't force my grandson to forgive your family," I said. "That's his choice. But I can tell you this. If Madison ever contacts him again, if she ever comes within 100 meters of him, if she even thinks about trying to manipulate him, I will not just cancel your leases. I will use every dollar I have to make sure Chen Park Developments never builds another building in this country." Richard paled. That would cost you millions." "I know exactly what it would cost, and I would pay it gladly." I stepped closer to him. "You don't understand men like me, Richard. You think money is the point. It isn't. Money is just a tool. The point is protecting the people you love." He left without another word. The summer turned to fall, and the leaves on my property blazed orange and gold. Tyler came to visit for Thanksgiving, driving up from Vancouver in a modest Honda he'd bought with his own money he'd earned as a junior associate at a small law firm that specialized in environmental protection. He looked different, lighter, like someone who'd set down a heavy burden they'd been carrying for too long. We sat on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the morning mist rise from the pastures. "I got a letter from Madison," he said. I waited. "She's in Hong Kong now, living with relatives. The criminal case for fraud fell through because I refused to testify, but her reputation in Vancouver is finished. No one in her social circle will associate with her anymore." "How do you feel about that?" Tyler considered the question carefully. He'd always been thoughtful, even as a child. "I don't feel happy about it. I don't feel sad. I just feel free." He looked at me. "Grandpa, why didn't you tell me about the land? About the money? I spent my whole life thinking we were just scraping by." I took a long sip of my coffee. "What would you have done differently if you'd known?" "I don't know. Nothing. Maybe. Or everything. That's why I didn't tell you. I wanted you to build your own life, make your own choices, become your own man. If you'd known you had a safety net of hundreds of millions of dollars, you might never have learned to stand on your own feet. Madison would never have been interested in me. No, she wouldn't have." I reached over and patted his shoulder, the same gesture Richard had used on me at the graduation, but with a different meaning entirely. "And you might have thought that was a good thing. You might have married someone who loved your money instead of someone who loved you. The hard times, the struggles, they show you who people really are." Tyler stared out at the land, his eyes distant. "So this was all a test?" "Life is a test. I just removed some of the answer keys." He laughed, a genuine laugh that reminded me of his father. "You're a tricky old man. You know that?" "I prefer strategic." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a hawk circle over the far pasture. "What are you going to do with all of it?" Tyler asked. "The land, the money, you can't take it with you." I smiled. I've been thinking about that. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. We drove my old truck across the property, past the cattle pastures and the forest, past the lake where I'd taught Tyler to fish when he was 7 years old, past the hill where his parents were buried next to my wife. Finally, we stopped at a clearing I'd purchased 5 years ago but had never developed. It overlooked the valley, with mountains in the distance and a river running along the eastern edge. It was the most beautiful piece of land I owned. "What is this place?" Tyler asked. "This is where I'm building the Margaret Carruthers Center for Indigenous Youth." Tyler turned to me, his eyes wide. "What?" "Your grandmother always believed in giving back to the community. She worked with First Nations families for 30 years, helping kids who'd fallen through the cracks of the system. When she died, I didn't know how to continue her work. But now I do." I unrolled a set of architectural plans I'd been keeping in the truck bed. The drawings showed a sprawling campus with dormitories, classrooms, a gymnasium, and a working farm where teenagers could learn agricultural skills. I'm donating 2,000 acres to the project, plus a $50 million endowment. It'll provide housing, education, and job training for Indigenous youth from across British Columbia. The first class of students will arrive next September. Tyler studied the plans in silence. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "Grandpa, this is incredible. But what about the leases? The Chen Park developments? I've already canceled them. The land will be subdivided and sold to local farmers, First Nations communities, and conservation groups. Chen Park won't get a single acre. Richard will be ruined." "Richard was always ruined," I said. "He just didn't know it yet. A man who measures everything by money has already lost what matters most." Tyler hugged me then, a fierce embrace that nearly knocked me off my feet. I held on to him, this boy I'd raised into a man, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. "Peace. There's one more thing," I said when we separated. "The center needs a legal director, someone who understands environmental law, land rights, and isn't afraid to fight for what's right. Know anyone who might be interested?" Tyler laughed through his tears. "I might know someone." 1 year later, I stood in the visitors' room of the Kent Institution, a federal prison in the Fraser Valley. The air smelled like concrete and resignation. I wasn't there to see Richard Chen Park, though he was serving his own time in a minimum security facility for the tax evasion and fraud that investigators had uncovered during the civil suits. His empire had collapsed like a house of cards. Every shady deal and creative accounting scheme dragged into the light. I was there to see Madison. She'd been convicted of wire fraud and identity theft, the inevitable result of her financial manipulation of Tyler and several other men she'd dated before him. The Crown prosecutor had presented evidence of a pattern. Madison Chen Park had a habit of targeting men who seemed isolated, vulnerable, and potentially wealthy. She would insert herself into their lives, gain their trust, and slowly drain their resources. Tyler hadn't been her first victim. He'd just been her first victim with a grandfather who refused to look the other way. She was brought into the room in an orange jumpsuit, her hair unkempt, her face bare of the expensive makeup that had once been her armor. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the reality of consequences she'd never believed would come. She sat down across from me, separated by the glass barrier. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice flat. "To gloat? To tell me you won?" "I didn't win anything," I said. "I just refused to lose. You destroyed my family." "Your family destroyed itself. I just stopped subsidizing the destruction." She leaned forward, something of the old fire flickering in her eyes. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? The noble farmer who taught everyone a lesson. But you're just as ruthless as my father ever was. You ruined us because I made one stupid joke. I canceled business relationships that were no longer in my interest. That's capitalism, Madison. You should understand it. You certainly practiced it with Tyler." Her face twisted. "I loved Tyler. You loved what Tyler could give you. There's a difference. And what about what you're giving away?" She laughed bitterly. "I saw the news. $50 million to some charity for kids. 2,000 acres of prime land that could have been worth 10 times that. You're throwing away a fortune to prove a point. I'm investing it in something that matters." "It's wasted," she said. "Those kids will grow up and forget your name. They'll take your money and your opportunities, and they won't give you a second thought. That's human nature. People take what they can get and they move on. I stood up. I'd heard enough. That's the difference between us, Madison. You see generosity as waste because you can't imagine giving without getting. You can't imagine doing something simply because it's right. I put my hand on the glass, a strange gesture of farewell. I pity you. I genuinely do. You had everything. Looks, intelligence, opportunity, and you used it all to tear people down instead of build something up. And now you have nothing. I'll get out eventually, she said. I'll rebuild. I'll find someone else. Maybe you will. But it won't be my grandson, and it won't be on my land, and it won't be with my money. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. The Margaret Carruthers Center? The first graduating class just completed their first year. 32 students, all of them thriving. One of them just got accepted to law school. She wants to become a prosecutor, to help people like you face justice. Madison's face went pale. Goodbye, Madison. I don't expect we'll meet again. I walked out of the prison into the bright afternoon sunlight. Tyler was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against my old truck with a coffee in each hand. How was it? He asked. Educational. For both of us, I think. We drove back to Williams Lake in comfortable silence, watching the British Columbia landscape roll past. Mountains and forests and rivers, land that had been here for millennia and would be here long after we were gone. Grandpa, Tyler said as we pulled up the long driveway to my cabin, I've been thinking about what you said last year, about the test, about showing people who you really are. And I met someone, a woman named Jennifer. She works at the center as an educational coordinator. She grew up in foster care herself. She's wonderful, Grandpa. She makes me want to be a better person. I smiled. Does she know about the land? The money? Tyler laughed. She knows I'm your grandson. She knows about the center. But the financial stuff? No. She thinks I'm just a lawyer who works for a nonprofit. She's dating me for me. Bring her to dinner on Sunday, I said. I'd like to meet her. You're not going to test her, are you? I clapped him on the shoulder. I'm done testing people, Tyler. The tests are over. Now it's time for the next chapter. The sun was setting over my property, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, I could see the construction lights of the Margaret Carruthers Center, working crews putting the finishing touches on the new dormitory wing. I was 73 years old now. My knees ached, my back protested every morning, and I'd started forgetting where I put my reading glasses. But I'd never felt more alive. Money comes and goes. Buildings rise and fall. Empires crumble into dust. But character? Character endures. They'd called me a senile old farmer. They'd laughed at my clothes and mocked my truck and assumed I was worthless because I didn't dress my wealth in designer labels. But I'd learned long ago that the people who measure worth by appearances are usually bankrupt in the ways that matter most. My wife taught me that. My son and daughter-in-law proved it with their short, meaningful lives. And now Tyler was carrying that lesson forward into the next generation. If you agree that respect is earned, not bought, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of truth and justice. And remember, your net worth is not your self-worth. The only currency that really matters is the kind you can't deposit in a bank.